lot of practice now in the Napa Valley and North Coast especially is trying to delay pruning as late into the season as possible. Probably the most important reason is the fact that Eutypa spores and some of the bot canker spores are still available to land on the open pruning wounds that are made by the pruners. And yes, we can still put treatments on there to try to prevent that from happening, but we know that sometimes Eutypa spores can land on an open wound, but maybe not really infect that vine for 5 to 6 years. So again, by delaying the pruning into the early spring, if you will, this is the first week of March, it's better, and it helps not to push things along too fast either. The main thing that a pruner looks for and listens to is the criteria of the vineyard manager and or what the winery wants to accomplish as a goal. And that means usually with 2 bud spurs, or 2 eyes as they're called, and a lot of times looking at the vine as a whole as their vigor and the potential for that, plus knowing again what the vineyard manager wants to do, because he has a better relationship to the soils, irrigation practices, fertility practices, and things like that. Some of the proper pruning techniques are to make sure there's adequate space between the arms to allow for fruit maturation and not too much overlapping fruit, and if there is, it's up to the pruner to try to separate that out. This particular vineyard is a unilateral cordon. In other words, it's got the trunk and the main part still comes down from one stake to another, with spurs on either side, kind of an open V pattern more or less. So there's still a large number of spurs on these vines, but again the goal is to separate this fruit acrosswise and through this unique trellis system that we have here to separate that fruit so we can get sunlight down through the center here. That's our goal, is to try to, when we move the wires, is open up the canopy so we can separate that foliage a little bit and get sunlight into the center too. With all that being said, proper pruning is, again, based on the caliber of the wood, the vigor of the wood. If it's short shoots like this, we definitely would leave it at 1 bud, or 1 bud here. This one here ideally should be removed because it's crowding in to this arm very closely. So I'm going to go ahead and start pruning this vine. So what we have here was a 2 bud spur that was retained last year, and actually 3 buds came and grew into shoots, not very strong, but this one here is technically called a basal shoot that came out, and it's probably the strongest one, but because it's going to be very close to this, I'm still going to go ahead and eliminate it from there, trying to keep my cuts as small as possible. This is getting too far out in the vine row, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And a 2 buds is technically, that's 1 and 2 buds position right there. Sometimes it's easier just to know it's about 2 fingers. I'm going to do this one here. Again, now we're starting to see a little bit of traffic jam in terms of spur positions, and it's up to the pruner to help make a decision on which would be the best. Again, maybe the hand-fist kind of decision is a good decision. This arm has actually grown up through the center here. Is it a good position or not? That's up to the pruner to make. I'm still going to leave it on the outside no matter what, but now I got to come back to here. My goal is, I think I would just remove the weaker one and leave this one here and take that out. Same thing here. We got this one coming up and we got this one going out, and there's a viable bud right there and there's a viable bud down here. Ultimately this spur arm will still continue to grow outward if not put into check, so my goal is to eliminate that and terminate it upward, because we'll have a shoot from here, and maybe a basal shoot, but the idea is now we can start getting it right here between our 2 wires. Here's a situation on this particular vine where we've got, in a very small area of less than a foot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 spurs, and it's very crowded in here. And what I mean by that is if every cane has 2 bunches, and there was a fruit bunch here from last year and another fruit bunch from there, there was one here and one down over here, you know, you can start seeing that this fruit starts getting very close together. So therefore proper ripening is not happening, proper getting the color and maturation is not happening. So again, a good pruner should realize that maybe something has to be eliminated in here before it gets much worse. I would think that by removing this would be one option, because again it's growing inside over that way, and also removing this, but keeping my cut as small as possible, because if Eutypa spores or bot spores, and keeping it in a vertical position so that way the sap can run off. If we made a bigger cut here, we're more subject to less healing and more subject to having the spores land on an open wound. So that's why we can minimize that twofold. But now I've eliminated these 2 positions, so I have 2 spurs here which are ideal, and I'm going to leave that one there. And I'm going to leave this one coming out to the right. This is what would consider a very weak position, but we'll retain it, and hopefully by one bud it'll grow one good shoot this coming year. Each vine is basically different than the next vine. It's like the proverbial snowflakes. No 2 vines are the same. And here in the Napa Valley, we also have to worry about maybe there's a lot more soil changes, a lot more going on within a vineyard. So not every vineyard vine is as vigorous as the next, not like in the Central Valley where it could be 40, 50, 160 acres of the same soil type, the same vine vigor, the same irrigation regime, the same everything, where they can, you know, basically piece rate or contract prune. Here because again it's on a vine per vine basis, that I want my guys to look at the vines as they're pruning and look at the overall brush, the length of the brush, realizing that, you know, we have adequate growth here and adequate capacity and vigor within these vines. This is normal to have the bleeding off right now. This is tylosis that's coming out of the open wounds, which is basically a sugary starch, and it will soon heal over that wound. But as long as it's pushing out, because the roots are pulling up some of the moisture out of the ground, it's like cutting your finger. You know, that'll also help keep the spores from actually landing and staying on those open wounds. Now, when we talk about open wounds, we're talking about something that's the nickel size or 1 inch in diameter as being the most subject to the spores, where small wounds like this are not as prone to get the Eutypa spores or the bot canker spores. But again, this is bleeding, a sap is coming out, and that's a good thing. If it's too dry and you prune too early, the wounds don't heal rapidly, and the spores can land on that wood and really start to have a problem much earlier. And the old criteria of pruning from basically leaf drop in November until March 1st, I think it's well behind us. We try to again push the pruning well late into the season as much as possible.